Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. As you can see, I'm sitting on the floor, which I don't normally do. It's because I have a big old unhaul for you today, which I was not anticipating doing at this point in the year. But Jacob and I have actually, I think I've talked about it a couple times, we've been looking at moving in together, and we were waiting for an apartment to come available. One did kind of unexpectedly with a pretty reasonable but still pretty soon move-in date. So we have applied and gotten that apartment, and that means I have a whole bunch of books that need to get off these shelves. I needed to actually unhaul some stuff instead of taking the time to read through them as I was originally planning. So that's what we're doing today. I have taken, I think I have like 30 plus books here that I'm going to be removing from my shelves. I'm going to be donating these to my local bookstore, except for any that Jacob actually wants to put on his bookshelves. He's here.
Yeah, this is how I'm going to determine which books are coming back home with me.
Yeah, so I'm gonna go through them, and he's gonna decide if there's anything he wants to take back with him after this weekend. He's visiting, and in a few weeks we move. So these have got to be out of here.
About a month from filming this, actually.
Yeah, so exciting. It's very exciting, but it's also, oh god, I have so many books to move. So because we have a lot of them to get through, I'm just going to dive straight in and not ramble too much, hopefully. And I probably won't talk a lot about what each book is about, but I'll talk a little bit about why I'm removing it from my shelves, I guess. I'll try to be quick. We'll aim for efficient here. And I'm going to start actually with the books I've already read, because I have a handful of things that are coming off my shelves that I've already read. And the first couple of them are from my horror manga taste test videos I did last year. I have I'm the Grim Reaper by Graveweaver and Killing Stalking by Kugi. These were just okay. My battery is flashing at me. How fucking rude of it.
Oh no.
Yeah. I'm gonna go get the other battery.
Okay, I'm just gonna...
Okay, we got a fresh battery. Sorry if the framing has changed slightly. We are doing our best with what we have available.
This is what we call a scuff setup.
Exactly. We're doing our best.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've covered it. We've covered the manga.
Yeah.
The next couple are, well, one of them, Dracula. I'm just getting rid of this copy. Also, I love how you can see the cat at this level. I'm just getting rid of this copy of Dracula. I ended up with two because somebody gifted me a really pretty Barnes & Noble special edition one. So I am keeping that one and passing this one on. And then we've got In the Time of the Butterflies by Julia Alvarez, which I had to read in high school. And it was definitely a pirated copy that my teacher had us reading, because it was literally a printout that she had stapled together.
Nice.
So I got one to replace it, and I realized that I am probably never going to read it again. I enjoyed it at the time. It is a very difficult story. It's based on true events, but I've just kind of forgotten it at this point. I'm not likely to reread it, and I could pass it on to another reader instead. So I feel like that's the best thing I can do for it now. Then we've got Burning Roses by S.L. Huang. This is a book I actually really enjoyed, but of all the books on my read shelf, this one I feel like has not stuck in my memory as well as most of the others. I tend to only keep books that either like really stick with me in some way, or that I refer back to a lot or talk about a lot, and this one just isn't sticking in my brain in the same way. So this one's gonna go ahead and go to some other readers. I should say at this point, you're gonna hear a lot of I'm passing it on to other readers, because that's typically how I feel about unhauls. It's just getting it into somebody else's hands. And the last of my read books are the Spy Family volumes 1, 2, and 3. I realized that volume 3 or 4, I think I might have read volume 4 from the library, but one of the two takes a sudden dark twist that I wasn't expecting, and I realized I just wasn't getting what I wanted out of the series anymore, so I kind of stopped reading it. I don't really need it on my shelf anymore. So those are all the ones I previously read, and I have a significantly larger pile of books that are unread. And I'm actually going to start with the ones that are from my self-destructing books list. I was not anticipating unhauling any of these at this point. I was really going to give all of these a try, but because I need to have fewer books to move, I did want to go ahead and reevaluate on some of those. So I do have 5 of them that I'm going to go ahead and call it quits and go ahead and pass them on. So we have The Hungry Earth by Nicholas Kaufman. I've tried to read this several times, and I can't get past the first chapter. It makes me like gag every time, and it's not good for my mental health, so I'm not going to read it. Then we've got Death by Dumpling by Vivian Chen. This one is just not my taste. I've read a few other books like this that I bought this at the time when I thought I was going to like cozy mysteries of this kind. I have since read some cozy mysteries of this kind and not cared for them, so I'm just not gonna keep trying to make this be a thing for me. We've got Vicious by V.E. Schwab, which I think is going to be a unpopular choice on my part because I know a lot of people love this book, but I've also read the first chapter of this and I just really wasn't vibing with the writing style, and I have a different book from this author that I think I would prefer to try. Next up, Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein. This one I'm getting rid of because I've read another book from Kirsten White since I acquired this one, and it was just okay, and since Frankenstein is one of my favorite books ever, I don't really want to do that to myself. So, I'm not going to.
Away it goes.
And lastly, Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. I just don't think I'm that interested in a pandemic story, and I read, again, a chunk of it. The writing is really lovely in here. I just was not vibing with the story. I don't think I really care that much about a pandemic story, and I bought this one for a class anyway that I ended up not taking because I did teaching internship instead. So, I don't really need to hold on to it. So that's all the ones from that. The rest of these are just random off my shelves. Pick up the biggest one first so I don't have to hold it up for too long. We have the Saga Compendium. I read volume 1 of Saga a long time ago, and it took me a while to get a hold of volume 2, which I just bought the compendium instead of buying separate volumes. But it took me a while to get a hold of it, and then I never circled back and read it. And I feel like I'm at a point now where I would need to reread volume 1, and I just don't have a lot of interest in doing that now. So, unfortunately, I'm not going to get caught up on Saga. Oh well. It just restarted too. Volume 10 came out last year, I think. And that had been several years hiatus, which is interesting, I think.
That is interesting.
What's next? We've got For the Wolf by Hannah Witten, which is a dark fantasy Red Riding Hood retelling with a romance in it, where the Red Riding Hood character is literally named Red, and she ends up going into the forest and I think marrying the wolf. She is the second daughter of the royal family, which means that she's for the wolf. I've realized that I don't care for kind of romantic-y type stories, and I get the sense that that's what this is. So I'm going to move on from this one. I think there's a big difference between romantasy and fantasy romance, and I feel like this is something I'm going to end up talking about in more depth later. But I like fantasy romance. I even like romance with fantasy elements, but I don't care for romantasy, and they're somehow all a little bit different, but I need to like think about how I would articulate that. But this seems like it's going to be a little more on the side of romantasy, which I don't really care for. And then I've got 2 books in the Baru Cormorant series. I picked these up when I was at a thing with you. If you remember Book Warehouse.
I do.
Yeah, so I bought these because they were super cheap, and it was like 3 for $20. I bought 3 books, and I have never picked these up. I haven't had any like strong interest in picking them up. I think these were popular a few years ago, but I haven't heard anyone talk about them in a while, and the 4th book has just never come out, so I'm like, this is going to be another one of those fantasy series that just kind of goes by the wayside. I don't have any interest in investing time into it if it's not going to eventually get finished.
Shout out Book Warehouse, though.
Shout out Book Warehouse. That was a really cool store.
Yeah.
They had some great deals. Next up we have Arrowwood by Mick Finley, which is a Sherlock Holmes, not quite a parody. It's about a detective who hates Sherlock Holmes. And that seems to be kind of his personality, is that he's kind of a drunkard and he hates Sherlock Holmes, but it's set in a world where Sherlock Holmes exists. And this guy resents him because Holmes gets all the like well-paying clients and like wealthy people coming to him, and Arrowwood is usually kind of solving crimes among the lower classes. And I read the beginning and I just found Arrowwood to be unpleasant in a way that I knew I was not going to enjoy reading for a long period of time, and this is a fairly good-sized book. Then we've got Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. I'm not getting rid of this because I'm not reading it. I just ended up with 2 copies, and I'm getting rid of this one because the font is painfully small.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah, it's like size 8 font. Here.
Oh, I love mass market paperbacks.
I bought that way back in high school because it was cheap, and then I recently, you can see I've got my big copy up there. That's the one that's sitting on top, because I accidentally left Misery downstairs. But yeah, I bought a nice hardback copy while I was able to get it on sale at Barnes & Noble because font is much more reasonably sized in that version.
That you don't need a magnifying glass to look at.
Exactly, and I like being able to see. I don't want to ruin my eyesight doing that. Similarly, not so much on font size, but as a mass market paperback, getting rid of The Lies of Locke Lamora. I have not read this. It's another one that's like a kind of infamously unfinished series. I know he's still working on it, but it's just been a very long time since it's been updated, and I would rather wait until such time as it is updated, as more books are coming out, to actually pick it up, and I can get it from the library. This is one's popular enough that it's usually in circulation. Next three are ones I never thought I would actually get rid of. This is my third book from Book Warehouse, I believe, actually, is in this stack.
Oh, yeah?
But I'm getting rid of all of my Carlos Ruiz Zafón books. Well, no, I say all of them. I'm keeping The Prince of Mist, but I'm getting rid of the Cemetery of Lost books, which I feel like this series, everybody who reads it loves it. And I have actually read book 3 in this series. It's also the only one I don't own. And I read it way back in high school because my Spanish teacher lent it to me. And she was just like, oh, I think you'd really enjoy this. So I borrowed her book. I read it in like 2 days and raved about it for probably weeks after that. And I thought it was just incredible. It was like the most beautiful book I'd ever read. And then it took me a very long time to hunt down the other books of the series, and I never picked them up again. And I think that my moment to read this has kind of passed. They're also very heavy. It'll be nice to not have to carry these with me to a different city. So yeah, I feel like the moment for me to read and enjoy the series has passed, because I think if I had read these right when I read The Prisoner of Heaven, I would probably be obsessed with them. But every time I try to pick them up now, I just can't get up the motivation to do it. Try not to knock the camera over. We'll just put these back on the floor. It's fine.
I say the spot next to me on the love seat has gotten quite full.
Yes, there's a lot of books in the seat now. And we are moving on to our final stack, if I can get it close enough to actually pull the books off of it. So on top here we've got Vagabonds by Hao Jingfang. This one I picked up at a local secondhand bookstore, and I think I bought it more because it was cheap than being like excited about the premise. It seemed kind of interesting to me, but it was like $2, so I figured I'd give it a try. And I read the first few pages. The writing is fine, but it doesn't really stick out to me, and on reflection, I'm less excited about the premise of this than I even thought I was at the time. So I'm just gonna go ahead and pass it on, hopefully somebody who will enjoy it. And then we've got one I think that I actually feel bad about in this stack. This one was one I got from a professor who was retiring. At the end of the semester I took a course with her, and she let her students rate her shelves for of all of her like academic books, but also her just kind of general novels that she had studied for all of that time. And I ended up picking up this one because it sounded interesting at the time, and I believe I was still planning to go on to a PhD in English, and I then changed my mind after this. But I ended up with The Gothic Family Romance by Margot Gale Backus. This is a Duke University Press academic text. Not really an academic text exactly. It's somebody's like critical reading of specifically Anglo-Irish literature. And I was really interested in this at the time. It does mention several authors I really enjoy are a part of this discussion. And I think the discussion it's having is kind of interesting. It's about, what's the thing here? Incorrect. Heterosexuality, child sacrifice, and the Anglo-Irish colonial order. I think that sounds super interesting, but also I've realized I'm not ever going to get around to reading this, especially now that I am not doing a PhD in English. It's simply not going to happen. So I know when she let everybody rate her shelves, it was because she wanted to make sure that these books ended up in the hands of people who would appreciate them. And I'm torn on it only because I feel like at the time I wanted to be that person that would appreciate it, but I also now feel like maybe it's better to pass it on to somebody else who will, again, hopefully appreciate it. So I'm hoping that in doing this, I'm kind of honoring that wish of hers, that it end up with somebody who will appreciate what it's doing. I think there's one other one I feel bad about in here, but it's less so. Next up, we've got The Space Between Worlds by Micaiah Johnson. This is parallel dimension sci-fi, I think. There's a woman who her like version of herself has died in a bunch of different places, which means that she can travel to those. But then it starts to seem like maybe that's been intentional, that maybe she's being killed in all these other dimensions. It sounds interesting, and I've heard good things, but at the same time, I don't really care for multiple dimensions or multidimensional stories. It's not really my favorite thing, and I think that's kind of held me back from reading it, so I am going to go ahead and pass it on. This is the other one I feel kind of bad about. It's Legends and Lattes, because his mom gifted it to me, and I have tried several times to read this, and I just got really bored every single time. This feels like a book where nothing that happens matters, and I think for a lot of people, like, that's very comforting, that it's, like, very low stakes, but for me, this isn't cozy, this is just kind of boring. I think my definition of cozy is just different to everyone else's. I say everyone, as if I'm the only person that feels this way, but, yeah, this version of cozy is just not comforting to me in the way that it has been for other readers.
I can promise you she will not mind.
Great, because it's going anyway. Okay, we got Women and Other Monsters by Jess Zimmerman. This is one I picked up on a whim because my local indie bookstore had it on a shelf, like on a display, and I thought it sounded interesting. It's like a series of personal essays, I think, surrounding like folklore and mythology. But I have since seen a review of this that talked about the way that this book handles fat phobia, and it sounded like it was going to be a fairly unpleasant read, and I just don't want to waste my time on it after reading that review. So, gonna go ahead and pass that one on as well. Then we have another case of multiple copies, because I'm getting rid of this copy of the Atlas 6, but I do have another copy of it. This is the indie version, and I guess I also feel a little bit bad about this one. This was a gift from another person in a Discord server I was in. But I ended up with 2 copies because I also had, I think it was the Illumicrate subscription at the time, so I have that special edition, which I believe was also re-edited by the author before it was published, so I would prefer to have like the author's preferred text, so gonna go ahead and give that one up as well. Then we have a book I bought in high school, How to Think Like Sherlock Holmes.
It's been a while ago now.
Yeah, never read it. I think my time for this one has passed as well. I started reading a few pages of this the other day while I was kind of evaluating my shelves, and realized that it reads very, like, early 2010s, which is when it was published. I think it was, like, 2012, and it talks about, like, oh, Sherlock Holmes is cool suddenly, and, like, he's been cool for a while. So, it just feels very painfully 2012, and I don't think that I'm going to get that much out of it. I also do have another book that's a similar concept that I think is presented in a way that's not quite so, like, based in the time it was written, if that makes sense. We've got The Mystery of Mrs. Christie. This is a historical fiction imagining the events that may have happened when Agatha Christie briefly went missing. I think she was missing for like 7 days or something. I don't know if you know about this.
I don't know.
Yeah, so Agatha Christie actually genuinely went missing for several days, and then popped back up, reappeared, and said she couldn't remember what had happened. So nobody knows where she was or what happened during the time that she was missing. And this is kind of an imagining of what may have happened during that period of time. And I think the longer I've sat on this book, I've realized that I just don't really need an imagining of that. I feel like I am comfortable leaving that period of history kind of unknown and leaving her life unexplored in that way. I don't know. I don't know that I'm comfortable with that as a concept anymore in the way that I was when I first picked this one up. I'm also not as big an Agatha Christie fan as I was at the time that I picked that up too. Oh, we're down to the last 3. It looks like a bigger stack, but the last 2 are just really chunky. We have Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and Other Stories by Robert Louis Stevenson. This one I'm just never gonna get around to reading. I probably will read it at some point, but I can easily get it from the library. And it's been sitting on my shelf, I think since early high school. I think I brought this one with me when I moved to the city I currently live in. And I moved here in like 2013. So I've had it for a while now, and I've never had any urge to pick it up. The last 2 are ones that have been on my shelf for a long time because these were authors I loved when I was in high school, and I feel like I'm just never going to finish these. I also haven't returned to them in a very long time. So we have the complete Tales and Poems of Edgar Allan Poe, and if I can get it off the floor, we have the complete fiction of H.P. Lovecraft.
I was with you when you bought that one.
You were.
I
Yeah.
talked you into getting it.
You did. I've had these both for a while now. I have read parts of them both. Actually, I read this quite a bit when I was taking a course on, like, we talked about the Southern Gothic. We ended up reading some Poe as, like, a look at, like, the history of Gothic stories.
Yeah.
But these two, I used to read them a lot more than I do now, and I know I'm never gonna, like, fully complete either of these authors' works, and they're taking up so much space on my shelves. They're super heavy, and so I feel like it makes more sense for me to get rid of them since I'm not, like, revisiting them with any regularity.
I do want to say, shout out to the Lovecraft book, though, because that remains to be one of the coolest looking presses. Like the mirror finish on the page and everything. It's really cool.
Yeah, it's a really pretty book. I just haven't reached for it in a very long time. And, you know, H.P. Lovecraft has a place in literary history. But there are so many authors who are doing what he did now better and less racistly. So I can just read them instead. And it's fine. So those are all the books I'm getting rid of. And I don't have to take those to the new apartment. No worries, I still have plenty of books. You can see I have some right here behind me.
God
These
damn.
shelves are still plenty full, but this was at least somewhat of a chunk of books off of them. It's a few books less that I have to pack, which is good, because I had to give the movers a estimated number of boxes, and I was like, I have no idea. So I'm hopefully going to stay within the allotted 30 boxes or less. But yeah, those are all moving off my shelves. Jacob's going to pick through them and take whatever he wants with them. So some of them I won't even be losing access to because he's going to have them and then we're going to move in together and I'll still be able to read them.
I had a couple in mind.
Fair. You're welcome to take anything that appeals to you. And the rest I'm going to donate to my local bookstore. So yeah, that is the plan. And that is all I have for you today. So I really hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, I hope you consider giving it a like, maybe even subscribing to see what comes next. I'm currently posting on Tuesdays and Saturdays, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.
Bye.